Well, good evening, everybody. It is so wonderful to have you here with us to kind of ring in the United States presidential election season with the provocative and influential art of award-winning political illustrator and visual journalist, Victor Juhasz. Imbued with a unique blend of wit and acerbic, laser-like vision, his influential art takes a hard and often humorous look at American society, politics, and the antics of national and world leaders. Victor received his art training at Parsons School of Design and began illustrating for the New York Times before graduation. His caricatures and illustrations have been commissioned by major magazines, newspapers, advertising agencies, and book publishers, including an amazing list like Time Inc., Newsweek, the National Observer, the Wall Street Journal, Rolling Stone, Esquire, GQ, the Village Voice, the Washington Post, Oxford University Press, Harper Collins, St. Martin's Press, and many more. In the tradition of combat illustrators that can be traced back to the Civil War, Victor has taken an active role in documenting the US military in theater as well as in training. And I'm going to show you in a minute his parody of Norman Rockwell's Saturday Evening Post cover, The Runaway, for the Village Voice, is now thankfully part of the Norman Rockwell Museum's permanent collection. Victor, it is so wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on this. I hope I do a good job here. I hope I'm
Well, Victor, there's no way you could not do a great job. Okay. So I'm going to try to bring up my screen, and here we go. Victor, the piece that I'm showing is something that you donated to the Norman Rockwell Museum, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about what spurred you to do something like this.
This was for a series of drawings I did in an issue for the Village Voice. That was basically, it was kind of an assessment of the broken windows policies that had been in effect, and then it was this particular story in that issue just dealt with Bill de Blasio's promises during the campaign to kind of like reorganize the NYPD.
Right.
And the reality that happened that he kind of backed off. So I thought it could be very funny because to do with that spoof of that iconic image by Norman Rockwell, and have de Blasio as the kid, which is kind of ironic because de Blasio is a tall person, but have a New York City cop, and at that time it was Bill Bratton was still the commissioner of New York, and just ever so slightly changing the setting in that illustration to make it more contemporary to the story that was running. So we have like, it's basically a police bar at the bar restaurant at this point. So you have pictures of police officers in the background. You have the TV going on with a Mets game probably. You've got special today. You've got cooked goose, which was my side joke, which is the kind of stuff I would and the kind of material I used to be really influenced by reading the old Mad magazines, the Harvey Kurtzman, Will Elder, Wallace Wood kind of Mad magazine, where you had all these little sub-sight gags going on in the illustration.
Well, Victor, we are so honored to have this piece in the collection, and it really captures an important moment in time. I want to jump in and just introduce you to my colleague, Mary Burley, who is our chief educator. And also behind the scenes are our wonderful Rich Bradway and Alyssa Stubel. So I'd like to say that if you have questions, as as Victor is speaking about his work, please feel free to put them into the chat. We will all be picking them up, and some of you may want to actually ask questions yourselves for those of you who are actually on the webinar. But we are thrilled to have questions from everybody. And if you're on YouTube, please just type them into the chat and we will pick them up from there, okay? Mary, do you want to jump in with kind of an important question about Victor's profession? Thank you.
I don't think we have sound.
There she goes. She's going to unmute.
Sorry about that. And Stephanie, I'm not sure you introduced yourself. Stephanie is our and it's all of our great pleasure to be with you this evening.
Thank you.
And with Victor. So Victor, we were actually really curious about having you talk a little bit about when your fascination with history and politics began and what shaped it. And then I think very important for our audience, how do you define political cartooning? And how did you make it a focus of your life work?
I think history and politics has been with me since I was a little kid. I'm the child I'm the firstborn of immigrants from Europe post-World War II. Okay. And my father had a deep, a very intense immersion in history, European history. And I kind of grew up with that awareness that a lot of the things that I was studying in my school books, he would like offer these corrections, like he goes, "That's not true," or "That's not the way it was," or something like that. And sometimes it would be a lot louder, sometimes it would be more vociferous. And that always impressed me. My father's willingness, it was one of the few things he would talk about, was history, and kind of like trying to set the record straight. So I became like a real pain in the ass in grade school, in the later grades, like eighth grade or so, 7th, 8th grade. And when we'd be studying history, I would be that kid who'd raise his hand and say, "Well, I'm not sure if that's really true because such and such and such and such." And
you were every teacher's dream.
Well, maybe not. But for sure, it was something that I felt the need to want to share. I don't know why, but I felt like, other than maybe a psychological thing of being a know-it-all at that time, or being a smart ass. But yeah, so that's been with me since the beginning. Consequently, it's one of the things that I've always enjoyed reading about. I'm almost entirely off fiction at this point, and the only books I kind of read at this point are histories, are very detailed and histories with qualifications, so that the kind of material that we grew up on in school was, once you get older and you start reading books that give more detailed explanations, you realize that you've kind of like either been sold pablum, or you've been given a kind of dumbed down version, a generic dumbed down version of history. So it was only natural for me, I guess, in retrospect, that I would in high school would start going to my library and start looking at the New York Review of Books which at that time had the magnificent illustrations of David Levine. And frankly, I would go on weekends to look at the review of books, first to look at his illustrations, and then to read the articles, you know. But it was always the illustrations that hooked me first. And of course, the technique and the authority that David Levine brought to his illustrations, to his caricatures, so that that was like one of my early foundation points. I mean, if I went further back, it was Mad Magazine, it was the Three Stooges, it was slapstick, and a lot of my ideas, a lot of my solutions to complicated stories are drawing from the well of slapstick and Looney Tunes and things, and Mad Magazine, as to get an idea across. And sometimes you get something more.
I'm looking at this particular images that's on the screen. Were you thinking of Charlie Chaplin with this one, just based upon what you're talking about in terms of?
Yep, absolutely. This was one of the things I learned from looking at the work of Ed Sorel was his ability to parody and to make something more of a very iconic image, whether it was a famous painting or a famous photograph. He would use that. He would use that and convert that to presenting an idea for an illustration, for a story. And I've always been a big fan of it myself because I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I think Ed would say that you already had the composition built in, a good composition built in if you went with the masters. So it was just a matter of playing with that, you know?
Victor, I just want to jump in. We have a couple of interesting comments, and the first one is a request to name some of the people in your images. People aren't recognizing everybody. And then the second one was a comment that the Hillary Clinton image was very inappropriate. And that brings me to some of our pre-conversation around how you actually aspire in a certain way. And you described that about your early childhood experiences. You aspire at some level to aggravate everybody. And where your work certainly leans left, this way that you think and work is part of who you are. And I wonder if you would just talk a little bit about that.
And this might even be an interesting, image, Victor, to address in that regard, because I think it seems that, that opportunity that cartoonists have to, in some way, question both sides and to question everything that's happening in the world is part of what you need to be doing.
Well, I think a fair amount of it might have to do with the fact that being the firstborn to immigrants here in the States, my folks came over in 1950, and they were very European. They were Eastern European, like Hungarian and German Hungarian, and they didn't necessarily adapt to what we would think of as American lifestyle and American mores and stuff like that. So growing up as a kid, I didn't really feel totally connected to Americana. And yet, I remember the first time I went to Europe as an adult, I didn't feel European either. And I kind of found myself feeling more American. And I think that inability to be totally comfortable in any one set of thinking or lifestyle or point of view has always been with me. I've always felt like something of an outsider. And I think what we were talking about before was that, when I'm in the company of my very left of leaning friends, I'm kind of like playing devil's advocate for what would be considered more conservative points of view. When I see my conservative friends doing what I would call predictable rants, I'll play the devil's advocate for more liberal observations, and at the same time realize that there's some sort of meeting point between the two. Doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50, but there is somewhere along the line where nothing is ever one way or the other.
Anyway, you're keeping the conversation going.
Yeah, I think your role is to question and to invite us to question as well. I wonder, Victor, if you could look at the illustration on the screen, tell us what's going on here and what the story was about, if you can remember, and then maybe some of the decisions that you had to make to create it.
Okay, so this was for Rolling Stone, so one assumes Rolling Stone is very left of center publication, but this is for a Matt Taibbi piece, and it was Matt Taibbi's writing in 2009 that a lot of the hope or expectations for Obama he saw as starting to really manifest as being giving way to the corporate interests that he felt already back there in 2009 were dominating the Democratic Party as well. Not so obviously, but it was there, and so this was, and that the hope and change was now being used as firewood almost, or kindle for the suffering outside, while the 1%, well, I don't know if we called them 1% back in 2009, but while the power elite were still doing quite well, they had been rescued from the catastrophe that they had very much a part to play in creating, and they got off pretty well scot-free. I mean, nobody, as Matt would say, nobody really went to jail, and they got their money, they got their bailouts, and they did quite well. So that's what this illustration was basically trying to convey. Going back to that comment before about the Hillary as being inappropriate, that was also a Matt Taibbi piece. That was for a story that he wrote for Rolling Stone, which was a post-debate analysis of one of those Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama debates, where at that point, Matt was playing with the idea that, Obama had been kind of anointed by Ted Kennedy as the next JFK. And apparently, if I don't remember that debate, but for sure, he must have come off as very astute and clear and focused, and Matt was speculating that Hillary was basically coming off as the Richard Nixon in that debate. So that's where those caricatures came in. I don't know if you can go back to that, because that.
Sure. Let's see if I can actually.
You have the scroll?
Yeah.
Okay.
Scrolling through slowly. It's not picking up too quickly. I apologize for that. But Victor, one of the things you talked about with us was how, many times an illustration will be the result of a conversation that has occurred between yourself and maybe an art director or other people at a publication. And you know, in this case, you're reacting to Matt Taibbi.
Right.
So I wonder if you want to say a little bit about that. It's an interesting collaboration. It's a collaborative art.
I think in many respects it is when it's, and in many respects when it's really successful, you will find that there is a very good collaboration between the artist and the art director, and depending on the publication, with editorial. I've had a great experience with Rolling Stone from the beginning, and while it's not often been the case that you go into the office and you sit down and you kick things around. I mean, when I started out 46 years ago, you actually sat down with the art director in his office at the New York Times or whatever publication. But usually, I mean, my eye teeth were sharpened working for the New York Times, or people like Steve Heller and Eric Seidman. You would sit down, you could spend hours at the New York Times just working up ideas, throwing them out, going to the editors, talking about it, arguing about it, and then eventually hammering out something that would satisfy the nature of the story, oftentimes a story that hadn't even been
Victor, can you add a little flavor to those conversations, specifically around kind of the balance between sort of big ideas and concepts versus what might show up in an observational, based on your observational drawing? So how does the melding in that conversation and back and forth around taking a big concept and then making it an image, how does that sort of work in those conversations?
Victor, I wonder if you'd even want to use this particular image to jump off of that point.
Great idea.
As an example. Can you say a little bit about what we're looking at and maybe how that collaboration would have functioned here?
If I'm correct, this might have been also for a Matt piece. This was the this was the 2012 campaign with Romney and Paul Ryan, and I don't even remember at this point what the story was about. But obviously, let's see, what are the elements here? We got. Well, at that time, I honestly felt that Paul Ryan was a far more dangerous individual in Congress than Romney could ever want to be. Ryan was an Ayn Rand acolyte. He was a cold-blooded Republican, almost like a libertarian. I mean, he was one of those dog eat dog, let dogs eat dogs kind of Republicans, and so I kind of I was thinking of those film noirs where you have the psychopath Robert Mitchum or Richard Widmark kind of character kidnapping somebody. In this case, they've kidnapped Lady Liberty, and Romney was in many ways during that campaign so obtuse and so unaware of a lot of the stuff that he was doing, but I felt Ryan was far more the malevolent character. So I have him at the on the driver's side as opposed to Romney. Romney's pretending to drive, and they're running over workers and people asking for fair wages, and I think it kind of bore itself out because after the 2016 election and Donald Trump came in, it was Ryan essentially and Mitch McConnell and a group of those Republicans who did from my analysis, did their master's callings and gave one of the most egregious and disgusting tax breaks to the 1% and gave a whole bunch of, or not even a whole bunch. They gave some crumbs to the middle class to show some sort of good faith. But actually, those crumbs were to expire in a certain amount of years, while the giveaways to the 1% were not to expire. So I think the illustration bears itself out. History bore it out, and Ryan indeed helped to wreck further wreck the system, in my humble opinion. And then,
from an artistic perspective, just the way you share your point of view with Ryan leaning forward and the rage on his knuckles, and you really Romney in the car seat having a boy on a fun ride. It's just really remarkable, the contrasts.
Thanks. It was fun. You're doing well when you're kind of laughing while you're drawing and coloring it. And I remember chuckling quite a few times.
What are we looking at here, Victor?
This was something for the American Prospect. And I believe, if you look, it was ostensibly about the healthcare issue, but what it was essentially the way the right was looking at the left, and how the right was viewing the left, and how the left was picturing the right. George Will is in the center because the story started off with one of George's screeds about the Affordable Care Act, and I thought the opportunity to parody that famous painting of John Brown, it just offered itself up. So I've got on the right wing, I've got Barry Goldwater, I've got Jesus, and I've got a Tea Party Republican. And on the left, we've got all the frightening things that they're warning about, the Maoist, the communist Democrats who are going to bring in a communist kind of healthcare system. And I've got the poor patient in the middle, not doing too well, and the doctors being affronted on.
Victor, I have a question from YouTube, and I'm just going to preface it by saying it's very, very clear that you are not attempting to be neutral in your work. But the question from a YouTube observer is, how do your personal biases affect what you portray through your visual journalism?
It depends on the level of anger. As a matter of fact, I think one of the what is political cartooning? And I showed you this book before.
Yes.
I think this is a great description of political
The Art of Ill Will, just to make sure everybody can see the title.
The Art of Ill Will. And it's always been the art of ill will, going back to colonial times, going back to Doré, going back to Granville, going back to Rowlandson and Tenniel, not Tenniel, maybe Tenniel, but Gilray. I mean, savaging Napoleon. I mean, it's always been that case, or savaging the French aristocracy. It's never been kind. A good editorial cartoon has got to have a certain element of anger to it, otherwise there's no point in doing it. I mean, when Thomas Nast was going after Boss Tweed, he wasn't trying to make middle of the road commentary about Boss Tweed. He was going for the throat, apropos for the time. We would probably say it was kind of mild. I don't think so. You showed an earlier picture of Uncle Sam eating the banker who's eating Uncle Sam. Well, that was originally, and I didn't think about it when I did the illustration. I was thinking more George Gross and how he portrayed bankers. But there was a piece that Thomas Nast did, and I believe it was a caricature of Horace Greeley, and consuming and being consumed at the same time. That circle, and he was, Nast had his prejudices. Nast did not like the Catholics, and he definitely had it in for the papists. Now, this piece that you just what do we want to? This is not a middle of the road neutral illustration. Okay?
Oh.
This came around the time of that infamous video that hit the news, that should have, by any previous decade standards, have sunk a presidential candidate. But the malevolence, I think, that people were feeling at that point for both political parties, and the malevolence that and distrust that the current president brought out, that dark side, that hatred for the quote elites, so that even a comment as he was making about grabbing women, and from our standpoint, from Matt, this was also for a Matt Taibbi piece, but was how do you illustrate this malevolence, this disregard for law and justice. And I was listening to Schubert's Death in the Maiden, and that triggered me to remember a famous sculpting of Death in the Maiden that I Googled up, and I just blanked out on the artist, Ibert, I believe it is. And I that's a side story, because Matt, after the piece ran, and after he saw the piece, he kind of emailed me and said, "Oh, did you base that on that Ibert sculpting?" And I was like the kid in class caught with the surprise question that he wasn't prepared for. And I said, "Oh yeah." And I really did not remember who the artist was. I just remembered the sculpting itself. So I incorporated that. Again, another kind of parodying.
Yeah, such a powerful work. And I think it seems, Victor, that the use of symbols in, a very astute way is very much a part of the way that you communicate, whether it's that you're picking up on like the format of an iconic painting, or using, say, the symbol of liberty in another way, as you are here.
The Statue of Liberty as all women.
Yes. But it's also America. It's just,
America, justice, liberty. Yes, I think it's remarkable.
The whole thing. It was an assault, and it's, depending where you stand politically, it's either you think it's an assault or it's not.
Right.
This was
extremely impactful. Do you want to say a little bit about this?
Yeah, this was an unfinished piece that I was kind of playing up for Rolling Stone when the story changed and Steve Bannon was out. And that's one of the characteristics of this current administration, is that news doesn't change from a week-to-week basis, or even from a day-to-day basis. The news changes from hour to hour, and the crisis factor changes from hour to hour. And I believe this story was about the evil force that was basically behind or certainly assisting Trumpism. And this piece wasn't even finished when we kind of changed courses because Bannon was out.
Wow. Victor, what does make a good political cartoon in your thinking? And then as you're drawing these incredible characters, what are you looking for? How do you distinguish them in a way that is recognizable, even though it's exaggerated?
Well, what makes a good political cartoon? Well, first of all, you can approach it from several different standpoints. You can approach it from the idea standpoint, so that you've got a lot of political cartoonists who are not great draftsmen. I'm sorry, I'm a real hard ass, and I cannot, and I tend to really push for the primacy of the drawing in my work. The primacy of the drawing as setting up the reveal of the character. But other times, in other formats, you have the idea that is paramount, that makes up for the fact that maybe the technique is not all that interesting to look at, or even good from a drawing standpoint, but the idea works. So that, let's go back to that Roger Stone, by the way.
Sounds good.
Because I did this, the one on the left, I did that drawing first. And then Roger Stone picked it up, and that was from his page, on his Instagram page. He reused it on his page, and he made the comment, "It is better to be feared than loved." Now this is
Wow. So he took your drawing and put it on his page and commented upon it.
right. My little answer, Roy Cohn, on the bottom, is somebody wanted to know who was that person on the left side of his back. Because we all know about Roger Stone's Nixon tattoo on his back. And I kind of played that off, but added a couple of other malevolent figures. I had a lot to, as far as I was concerned, could also be classified as influencers.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of those situations where somebody who makes the news actually commented on something I did. But anyway, so you have the idea. Maybe not such a great drawing, but the idea is good. And then you have sometimes the great technique, but not a great drawing. I mean, not a great idea. And then you have some of the masters. You have Ed Sorel, you have David Levine, you have Rick Meyerowitz, or Ralph Steadman, and Steve Brodner. I could name quite a few more, but there you have that gelling, that really nice simpatico between great ideas and great craftsmanship in drawing and rendering. And that's where, for me, that's always like, wow, that's the stuff that made me want to do this kind of work when I was just growing up, when I was going to art school. That kind of work was very influential.
Victor, you bring all that together. It's just amazing. I wanted to just go back in terms of the Roger Stone, where he actually commented upon your piece. Do you get a lot of public reaction to your work, and do you like to get public reaction?
Let's go with the second question first. I don't really necessarily encourage public reaction. I don't necessarily look for those fist fights on social media. So I'm actually in one sense glad that I don't get a lot of hate mail and stuff like that. Have I gotten reaction? I've gotten reaction. But again, I don't look for it. And so consequently, I guess when I promote, I'm not promoting it to draw the other side in to a bar fight. You know, this was a never used idea, but it was something for a Rolling Stone piece, also a Matt Taibbi piece about Giuliani just basically whoring himself, whoring the whole 9/11 story, and basically that's all he was about. That's all he could promote, and that's all he could keep returning to.
So this did not get published, Victor? And is there a reason that it didn't?
Well, because we went with another idea, a more traditional idea of him just raking in dollars off an exploding World Trade Center.
Mhm.
On his speaking fees, on his just the way he promoted himself. I mean, he became America's mayor as of 9/11.
Right.
And a lot of people forget that he was Rudy Giuliani on 9/10, and many of us couldn't wait for him to get the hell out.
Victor, we have another question from YouTube, and it's asking about that relationship with editors and editorial guidelines, and how you find your line, what, or do you even have a line that you cross or don't cross in terms of content? And here is one of my favorite images: the hurricane of chaos.
No, we can use this because no lines were crossed. And this is one of those great opportunities where my wife and I were still living not living, but we had an apartment in New York City, and this story came up, and I was in town, and it was like, hey, Vic, we'd like you to do a cover, and it's going to be, on Trump, of course. And
this is a Rolling Stone cover?
A Rolling Stone cover.
Yep.
It became a Rolling Stone cover. And I said, guys, I'm in town, and we'd like you to do some inside illustrations too, but we want to do this cover. And I just thought it was a perfect opportunity to do it real old school. I said, guys, let me come over. Let's sit down in the office. Let's hammer some stuff out. Let's hammer some ideas out. Just because I've always found that there is just something so kinetic to be face to face with your art director. Maybe the editor comes in, because the editors at Rolling Stone have always they always got it. Which I can't say for all publications, but Rolling Stone's editors always got it in terms of understanding the illustrator.
So you're bouncing back and forth with ideas. What are people saying in the room, Victor?
Well, this ironically was one of my first ideas. We didn't have a story yet. We had some notions where the writers, one of whom was going to be Matt Taibbi, where they were going to go with the story. And this was like, I had my pencils and pads, and I was just like scribbling up this tornado. I said, this guy is chaos. He is, he's destructive. He's just wrecking everything as he moves along. And okay, good. And we just kept on, presenting other ideas, drawing them up. And then after a few hours, we kind of called it quits, went home. I was kind of sure that another idea was going to be the cover. And then it went a big loop the next day and came back to the tornado as the cover image. I think it's because it's so clean. I think that's where editorial And that's where the management part comes in. You want something that's going to read and grab attention on a newsstand, or on, just grab a potential reader's attention. And that's where it came about.
Was this image informed by cartoons in any way? Like I go back to sort of Bugs Bunny images.
Maybe not this image. This image was actually informed, and this is one of the tighter versions. This is the one that made it to the cover, but this got a little more progressively tight as we kept on doing and redoing and redoing. I had more, a couple of my early sketches were more front-on views, where I had this really distorted face going on, which kind of, for me, was really appealing. But at the same time, does that read? That reads more symbolically, and unless if it was an inside piece, it could have worked better, a more front-on, more distorted, screaming tornado. But for a cover, you want something that's going to read and be clear, and grab attention. So that's, I think, where the decision came down. And quite frankly, it was a good decision. And it was a great piece to work on. And it was one of those opportunities where I could just draw. I could just use that pencil and just go wild on a big 18 by 24 pad.
It's great. It's very powerful work.
Did that answer the question? This was one of the ideas. I thought this was going to be the cover, quite frankly. The suicide vest.
Oh, that's interesting. So this was this part of the same article, Victor?
Part of the same issue, yes.
Yeah.
I kind of dug the image, and I thought it could really work well on a cover. But I guess layout and all that got factored in, and we used it on the inside.
Mm-hmm. So are there, particular characters that you really like to draw because they have such pronounced or unique characteristics? And then are there other people that are just hard to draw?
There are people, let's go with the second part first. There are people I absolutely hate to draw. I hated drawing Hillary Clinton. And even in the world of Google, where you could find 10,000 images, I found it in a very disquieting way. Hillary Clinton never looked the same way in two photographs. She morphs. She morphs from just the slightest turn of the head, and she becomes a completely different person. And I felt psychologically that said something about the personality, that it was so malleable. It was so political in a certain way that it would change with the slightest motion.
Who have you loved drawing, Victor?
I don't like drawing Trump anymore. Let's put it that way.
Now, why is that? Is it just you've done it so many times?
I'm overdosed on the man, So I still have fun with him. Okay, here we still have a totally orange head. Later on, recently I've been doing illustrations of him. And this is another one of those situations where there's a tell going on, where he has become so obviously delineated, the orange sprayed on his face. I said, nothing works right about this administration. Even his makeup people who spray that fake tan on him in the morning, it's almost like they don't even care anymore. They just kind of stick his head through a circle, a cardboard and circle, and just spray it. And then he stands back, and you have this 74-year-old skin, and then you have this orange, this ghastly orange paint job starting very clearly.
And you really make that distinction here between the facial color and the color of his arms.
And the ear.
Yes.
And the ear, yes.
Yes, but it just gets more obvious, especially in terms of like what's been going on, just recently. So I picked up on that, and I've incorporated that now. It's not that I don't have fun, but I also don't. I'm always trying to find, because I've done them so many damn times. I'm also always trying to find some new angle to draw. I cannot tolerate the idea of just drawing the same thing over and over again. And yet I don't want to grossly distort him either in the more obvious caricature way. I'm trying to say something. I'm trying, like that pout he's got, that mug he's got here while he's tweeting. I'm trying to, that's something you see and you note it in the photograph. And you want to incorporate that because that is a tell for me.
And I think all the detail that you have in a drawing like this is fascinating. I mean, I think it's based upon a famous American painting. Is that correct?
Oh, it's Washington Crossing, Delaware.
Yeah.
But then you've got his, the golf clubs and, other things that are identifiable to the character. Is that something that you're always thinking about? What are the supporting elements and characters here?
Right, and I've got the swine, the business
swine. How about the hair extension? What was your big idea there?
The hair extension?
Just the additional flow, which a lot of teenagers would relate to.
Well, that was for a while he was letting his hair kind of the way he combed it. It would kind of like do that 50s DA thing. He's been cutting it lately, keeping it shorter, but he had that for a while. I'm still keeping it because it fits with his, in my mind, it fits with his phony baloney WWE wrestler image too.
Right. We have a
question on YouTube. And, obviously you're an incredible draftsman and composer, and your technical training, our viewer says, comes through very clearly. Can you talk about your materials and process from sketch to final drawing?
Yes.
If you want to use something like this as an example, maybe take us through, how you approached it and what materials you were using.
It's interesting that we're on a pen and ink drawing with watercolor and gouache wash on it because I've been for many years at this point, moving away from pen and ink. And actually, if I use anything, I don't really use the crow quills anymore. And I still have some of the best Spencerian #1s that you cannot find anywhere. And I still have more than a lifetime worth sitting somewhere. But I just got to the point where I started losing confidence in my pen and ink, traditional pen and ink way of working. The inks started really disappointing me, and B, the paper started disappointing me, as opposed to when I first started out in illustration. Now, my peace of mind, more often than not, is with the uniballs. I love using them. The micros are great, and they're waterproof. And I can scribble, and I don't have to worry about the ink failing and or the pen getting caught in the paper and splattering in a way that works wonderful for Ralph Steadman, but doesn't work nice for me because it's not what I'm trying to shoot for. I'm still, you know, and it still allows me to keep that kind of sketchy immediacy that that one of my influences, Ed Sorel, is so great at doing. Just that, those lines that go down, you know. And I work on bond paper, which is somewhat transparent but very durable. And if I don't like the drawing that I'm working on, I could just slip it under the next sheet, kind of start redrawing it, start rethinking it, stick with the material that I like, and change what I don't like. And if I get to the point, yeah, see, by this point I'm totally giving in and just working with pencil and watercolor. But so I'll put the pen line down, and if I get to a satisfactory point with the drawing, then I'll mount it to like a much sturdier Strathmore paper, an acid-free paper, dry mount it, and then I can work the watercolor on top and not have to worry about the paper rippling. I'm a very slow learner. So it was decades before I realized, and it wasn't before somebody, a friend of Ed Sorel's, Stephen Alcorn, whose father was John Alcorn, who's a dear friend of Ed's, told me, oh, Ed works on bond and then he just mounts it. And I was like, wait a minute, what does he do? So I got myself a mounting board, or a mounting press, and started doing that. And that way I was able, because up until then, I was just doing these great drawings, well, sometimes great, but then I'd throw the watercolor on and the paper would just ripple and just warp. And it would just always feel like the worst goddamn thing that could possibly be happening. And I just never thought of that simple action of mounting.
So mounting basically gives you the opportunity to keep the paper stretched and flat.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is all uniball, this drawing. A little bit of pen and a little bit of traditional Spencerian points with Crocro. I mean, with ink. But for the
Victor,
most part,
we have a couple of questions.
go ahead.
One is, do you have any well-known illustrations espousing a conservative point of view that you'd like to talk about? And
Well, let's see. I think the closest I come to conservative point of view is like some of those really scathing pieces that Matt would write for Rolling Stone, criticizing the way Obama was handling the economic crisis, and how he was basically caving into the money or the 1%, the corporate, that he was essentially a corporatist, that he was not this liberal, that he was actually quite comfortable with being a front man for corporate interests.
so the cog in the machine image we looked at earlier.
Yeah. Well, no, that was
a different idea.
that's for Paul Krugman, the spoof of, or the parody of Charlie Chaplin's
Right.
Charlie Chaplin. What? Oh God! Somebody help me out.
Right, I can't remember the name of the movie, but I certainly remember the scene.
Right. So anyway, that was for a Paul Krugman 1 year review of first review of Obama's
Modern Times.
Modern Times economic policy. The cog in the wheel, in many respects, is just that. He didn't really overhaul the system, you know, depending on how you argue. Let's see, do I have anything? I can't see my own version of this scroll. I've done stuff with a more conservative point of view.
But it sounds as though, I mean, in many ways, you have to be an equal opportunity offender, because if there is a topic that comes up, no matter what side it's on, you would address it.
Well, unless I don't want to do it.
Have you ever turned down a job in terms of something you really did not want to do?
Absolutely. Because I totally disagree with the point of view. And I'm not that much of a hired gun that I'll do something that totally goes against me. Then again, I'm 66 and not 36 with a family. So early on in my career, I did some work for a publication called the American it was an Emmett Terrell publication, the American Spectator, I think it was, and it was during the Carter years. And I realized after a certain point I was doing these covers for this publication, and then I started reading the articles, and I was like, well, wait a minute, I'm not on board with this stuff. So I kind of took myself out of that semi-steady gig.
I think there was another question that related to sort of your formation, and this was around the decision to work as an embedded artist, documenting the military, and how that impacted your point of view and your work, all the work that followed. Was that a formative time for you in terms of shaping that point of view?
My desire to embed and document the action, the workings of the military come out of my youngest son was a Marine for 15 years, and but even by the time he had gotten into the Marine Corps, I was already long before he had gotten into the Marine Corps, because I was already quite an older person. But that is, I've got to backtrack here. You're looking at stuff here in this scrolling of basically caricatures, editorial comment, and humorous material. The other thing that was pushing me in my growing up was looking at the work of people like specifically Howard Brody on CBS, who was the courtroom artist for CBS TV, and just looking at those drawings he did of like the Sirhan trial, the Chicago 7, the Lieutenant Calley trial, all these real big famous trials going on. And he was the court artist, one of the court artists, but probably the premier court artist for CBS at the time. You had some other great ones yet, I don't want to start naming them because then I'm going to forget some others, but he was terrific. And I really gravitated to his work. And I thought to myself, God, I'd love to do this too. So on one hand, I want to do Wallace Wood and Harvey Kurtzman and Bugs Bunny and Mad Magazine. And on the other side, and the other part of me wants to do like real serious repertorial action-focused gestural realistic drawings. So it wasn't until later on that I realized that James Jones, the writer James Jones from Here to Eternity, wrote a book on World War II, which was all illustrations from World War II artists. Brody was in there. The great Care Eby was in there. The Thousand Yard Stare. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
Thomas Lee.
Thomas Lee, yes, right. People like that are just in the book. And that stuff, that's where I realized that Brody was also a combat artist. And I thought to myself, this is interesting. This is interesting. And when I met him, when I became friends with him at the John Hinckley trial, because I was called down by the Washington Post to draw that trial, and he was doing the work for CBS, and we became fast friends. A year or so after we were working on that Hinckley trial, my first wife passed away, and I kind of dropped out of the whole repertorial illustration scene because I concentrated on staying at home and doing what I could to raise the kids. And so that aspect of my life kind of went away for a couple decades. And then I was married again in the late 90s. And by this time, we were starting to get the empty nest situation happening. And my wife, Terry, was like, hey, this is your opportunity. Because I started getting these feelers out. I started getting these feelers to go on location. I had done a children's book of military, related to the military families. And got a couple of those pieces into the Air Force art program via our chairman of the Government Services Committee, John Witt, at the Society of Illustrators. And that started sending me on assignments. But they were short assignments. And you were with other artists. And oftentimes everybody had to, sort of like do this, well, what does everybody want to do? And what I wanted to do was, it started sticking in my mind, I wanted to spend more time with a particular unit. I did not want to jump from scene to scene, going around with our escorts. I wanted to spend time with a particular group, and that actually came to fruition in 2011 with an Army medevac unit from Alaska that was working in Kandahar. And I was out there and spent a few weeks I spent a few weeks in Afghanistan, but then I spent 2 weeks with this particular medevac unit, this dust, they call it dust-off units. And that was where I really felt, okay, now I'm here. Now I'm embedding, and I got an opportunity not to feel like after 3 or 4 or 5 days that I'm starting to get the hang of it and I've already got to leave. I can hang here now. Now I've got the hang of it, and I can take it, I can let this start rolling. So that's what happened there.
And your drawings and paintings from that experience and others are absolutely extraordinary. And we'll look forward to our Veterans Day program to talk about that a little bit more.
Well, thank you. And of course, my work in the past few years, well, probably about 5 years at this point, has been almost entirely with the Marine Corps. And that's been absolutely fantastic. And I'm there to tell the stories. I always wanted to tell the stories of the boots on the ground, of the, not the machines, not the machines. There's so many artists who can render to hell and paint a beautiful picture with a jet or a tank, or they can just do the most incredible work. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do in that tradition of Howard Brody or Caribbean. I wanted to draw those soldiers and Marines doing the dirty work. Yeah, this was the first illustration where I really focused on those awful paint jobs.
We have we also are really curious, Victor, about what you're working on now. If you're doing anything with the, what your focus is for the election season, and of course, being the Norman Rockwell Museum and bringing back the Four Freedoms exhibit that is currently in Denver, we're also really curious about how you're thinking about freedom these days. And reimagining freedom in 2020.
And being impacted by having to watch the news constantly in your line of work.
Yeah, so that was a lot of questions. So maybe first, what are you working, how does this election season, how are you feeling about what's coming ahead? Are you watching the Democratic debates? And
no, I'm not watching the Democratic convention.
Okay, convention, I'm sorry.
I basically, I'm trying as much as possible to lay back and not get embroiled in all this. I mean, I think it's really, unless it's something that really provides oxygen to you and is your raison d'etre, I find it, from a health standpoint, it's debilitating after a certain point just to be enmeshed in politics. Even during the Carter years or the Reagan years or the Bush years, it didn't feel like it was every goddamn hour another crisis is going on, you know? And you could back off. You had a rest. You had an opportunity to rest. And now it's like it's the worst, the most horrific reality TV show, 24/7. And even when you're sleeping, there's somebody in the White House tweeting at 4 o'clock in the morning some screed that's going to get the morning news. I don't want to be that. I don't want to follow it. I don't want to react to it any more than I have to.
I want to give it oxygen, right? That's the.
Well, I don't want to give it oxygen, and I don't want to deplete my oxygen. So if I'm given a story, yes, I will pursue it. But I'm almost past the point where I'm doing a lot of stuff on my own, just generating ideas. I'm working on a project now that I can't talk about right now, but it's a humdinger. It's absolutely exciting, and I'm having such a great time with it. It has nothing to do with politics, and it's going to be semi-long. It's going to take a few months, so it'll keep me occupied. I'll still do my work for, hopefully for Rolling Stone. I'll still for people that I like to work with, for The Nation, for Rolling Stone, for the American Bystander, for the National Observer in Canada, which is a great online publication.
Well, Victor, this has been an amazing conversation, and I guess I'm just going to ask you one closing question, which is, what do you feel the role of cartoons is in sustaining democracy? I mean, does it open something up for us that keeps us thinking about our democratic ideals?
Think about it this way. Let's go back to colonial times. Let's go to post-revolution times. You had publications. You read a publication, whether it was printed by Ben Franklin or whether it hated Jefferson or was in favor of Jefferson. There's never been journalism that was not. This whole notion of journalism having to be objective. It's not objective. It's always got to have some sort of point of view. In the older days, you had the major stations. You had CBS, NBC, ABC, and Uncle Walter or Chet and David or Frank Reynolds. They basically told you what was going on for that day. And they distilled it in an hour. You don't have that anymore. You have, I don't know how many, but it feels like 100,000 different channels with 100,000 different specific points of view, which therefore attracts 100,000 different types of people who are looking to seek out the news that echoes that specific point of view in them, in themselves. They're not looking for a contrary point of view, no matter what, whether you're left or right, for the most part. They want something that confirms what they've already felt to begin with. You saw that with Fox when it came out, when it first started, and was presenting something that was utterly, unashamedly partisan, right-wing partisan. Then MSNBC became, which was sort of like an offshoot of CNBC, which was financial. But then MSNBC started going, okay, well, we'll be the partisan left. You have the same way with illustration now. And then just surf the web. Any conspiracy theory you want that satisfies what you think. You don't believe COVID? You don't believe Fauci? You think Fauci is running a child sex ring, or you think that some type of bleach is gonna cure you, or there's this medicine that nobody wants to talk about that is going to do it? You'll jump on that, all right? If you feel that Fauci is a saint, you're going to jump to that website. So where does that put us illustrators? Thomas Nast would do his cartoons for a specific publication, that if you read that specific publication, that was, that kind of all made sense. Who are we now? There are so many online publications. We have just a small fraction of the population that pay attention, that maybe pay attention to what we do. Do they influence? Oh, great thing. Look at this. And while I'm talking, let's see how much has changed. During the Jefferson-Adams campaign of 1800, this is a project that I'm currently working on and will be working on with just it's a private commission project. And I'm one of the artists who are doing, who's doing various political campaigns since George Washington. But this was the nature of, if you read the Connecticut Courant about Jefferson, this editorial, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will all be openly taught and practiced. The soil will be soaked in blood if Jefferson would get elected. So what's changed? Has partisanship just started up now in the past 4, 8 years, 12 years? No, it's always been with us. Now the question is the variety, the vast spread of information and disinformation has made it almost impossible to to get some sort of sense of coherence for a movement, for an idea, and for illustrators to try to, I work for Rolling Stone. Well, guess what? If you read if you're going to see my illustrations in Rolling Stone and nod your head yes, the chances are you've been reading Rolling Stone anyway, and you've already agreed with a lot of their premise. If you're reading National Review and you see a Roman Gen illustration, you're going to nod with that, because that's confirming what you feel about Clinton or Obama or AOL or something like that, or someone like that, or Antifa versus the Boogie. What are they? The Boogie Boys? What? That right-wing group, the militia group. I just blanked out on that too. Anyway, that's.
I just want to say, Victor, that I think you're underselling the images, and that in fact, I really believe that what you're doing is creating. You are the enigma for sure, but you're also encouraging conversation, which is, I think, what ultimately sustains the democracy is staying in conversation and participating.
Well, encouraging conversation is great, and if we can do that, that's great. And if an illustration can bring up a point, that's wonderful.
It's just hard work.
Well, it's a lot of voices you've got to compete with.
Right.
But I think the visual carries a punch that honestly words do not. And I think the fact that you hone your vision so beautifully and carefully really means that the points that you're making get driven home in a very succinct and amazing way. So Victor, thank you so much for taking this evening with us. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you and so enlightening. We want to thank everybody for joining us. It's been great to have you with us. Next week, we will have another terrific program on Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. with some cartoonists, some humorists who have turned to children's book art for their form of expression. And we also just want to let everybody know that on October 13th, I believe, we will be opening Imagining Freedom. And that is focusing on Norman Rockwell's Four Freedoms within the context of both the past and the present. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the museum or online or both, hopefully in the near future. So Victor, thank you again. You are absolutely incredible. And we were so fortunate to talk to you tonight.
Well, thanks a lot. It was great fun. I hope I was coherent enough. And
you are always coherent and always fascinating. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Just enjoy it. Really.
And thank you to our wonderful audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're so happy you were all there.
Mr. and Mrs. America, thank you very much.
Okay.
We'll leave with Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes. Bully.
Have a great evening and thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.